Computer viruses are one of the most annoying things that the average person on the internet can run into, and it can be one of the most annoying things to deal with. People who are affected by this are those who aren't tech savvy, or they visit a certain hub a little too much. But with the evolution of the internet, so have viruses and malware evolved to keep up. So I've always wondered what were some of the most notorious viruses. I'm talking about those that didn't just affect your everyday internet users, those that have affected businesses and even government property. Let's rewind it back to an early era of the internet and talk about the birth of one of the first viruses that was responsible for a lot of destruction for such a very basic sequence of code that was too much to handle for early internet users in the 1980s. What was this malicious code that broke the early internet, you may be wondering? Well, this would be the Morris worm. The person behind this would not be found until a while later. As panic raged on, what was the internet at the time came to a grinding halt as the virus needed to be addressed first before things could go back to a more stable condition. Essentially, the Morris code would attack the enter the debug mode of the Unix sendmail program, which is basically responsible for running commands on the computer such as programs and software. Essentially, it is the brain of the computer that makes everything function. In the early days, the sendmail program was not able to multitask or operate various softwares at once. At least in the early days, this was a big flaw. This was easy to exploit as well as allowing things to enter the debug menu, which would run just about any prompt without restrictions, whether good or bad. Whole servers were created to work with a network which would allow computers to connect to each other through said servers, which is the most basic form of the internet. The worm is a virus that basically allows itself to spread through self-replication, essentially creating a feedback loop that is infinite, and it spreads into a network of computers. This virus, if set up on a big server, or several, all computers can get infected. The internet consisted of 60,000 computers. The reason why there wasn't a lot of computers available is because they were strictly for government, education, and business use. Only a select number of people were able to access them. The internet was an early version of the World Wide Web, which most people use interchangeably and don't understand the difference. They are both big servers that connect computers, but the big thing is that the internet wasn't on a big scale like the World Wide Web. That was to come years down the line. Essentially, the first hacker behind this made a program that would infect computers and then tried to spread it onto another one in the server. Meanwhile, stealing data that was found in the Unix sendmail program. It would enter the debug mode that was responsible for the whole computer. But why did this hacker do this? Was there a certain reason as to why it had happened? Did Russia finally make an attack on the internet? Or was there one individual that wanted to spread chaos by destroying the newest piece of technology? The damages that were caused were hard to quantify, as this was the first ever cybercrime, and there were no laws that would convict the culprit of anything. So, where did this all begin? This story starts in the late 1980s, and during this time the internet was not readily available for most people. The access to PC was starting to trickle out to people as things were changing. During this time, they were connected to the server, and students would work on programming. This was the norm for Cornell University. The students were going on to the normal routine of working on testing the network. Code and tried to create a tool that would improve computers such as safety, which was easily exploitable, and this hacker would target a huge loophole in the program. The Unix operating system had a huge problem with the finger program, which is responsible for a computer system or a people in a network which keeps track of every user in the network, such as login reports, as well as ID and information in the network. With a higher speed network, it was a concern that something could potentially slip through the cracks, such as spamming like most viruses that replicate themselves over and over again when run. Early forms of viruses were known, with the first virus being the Creeper program. It was designed as a test to see if self-replicating was possible. I know most people are confused, but to make this simple, what a virus usually does is replicate itself when you run the program, so it multiplies so much that your computer can't keep up and it crashes or severely slows down the computer. So, the solution to a virus typically is to remove the program that causes it to self-replicate. So viruses weren't uncommon, but the Morris worm was a whole nother beast that was yet to be explored. So, the hacker would release this worm one night on Wednesday, November 2nd, 1988. The Morris worm would reveal itself when computers would slow down to a screeching halt. Each computer was infected with various logs of a program that was running. The worm code was rather simple, as it would spread onto a computer and steal information and guess password combinations by using various possible answers. Essentially, it would brute force the password by guessing until they got the password correct and installing itself onto the computer, and then it would spread to another computer. So, this is where the problem starts. Initially, this virus would install itself into the computer and then pass it on to other computers in the network. So, you would think that it is an easy problem to fix by just getting rid of it, right? Yeah, that was where the problems began, as the hacker made it so that the computer would infect other computers to make sure the worm would stay there to get infected again by the same virus, even though it already had the virus. So, this measure would prevent people from just removing the virus outright, and the hacker could get all the information that they wanted. But, he created a problem that would destroy several computers. One problem that would happen is the worm would spread to computers. If the computer was already infected, the program would roll the dice and to decide whether it should infect the computer again. The chances of being infected once again was 1 in 7 chances, so there was a 14% chance. Why is this a problem? Well, the reason as to why it is a problem is because of how fast the computer is able to run. What I mean is that the worm could try to infect other computers again and again, and some of the same computers were victims. So, even though 1 to 7 is really low, but if you roll the dice 7 times, you would get infected once. And if you were to roll it 70 times, then the program would get infected 7 more times. So expectedly, this program would exponentially replicate itself hundreds and thousands of times on just one computer. That was because the ratio was way too high, and it wasn't hard for the computer to re-roll. This is what we call a DDoS attack, which is an attack that floods a network with a lot of requests and commands running simultaneously on a network, ultimately disrupting the server. There is a DDoS attack that most internet users are aware of, and is different from a DDoS attack because a DDoS comes from just one source. Meanwhile, a DDoS comes from multiple places aside from where it came from. Either way, this just floods the server with a lot of traffic, ultimately crashing or severely slowing down all activities. The program didn't corrupt or delete files from the computer, but it would cause the computers to crash or corrupt files. This was an obstacle that was multiplying itself again and again, so even if you deleted the many copies of the program, once you reconnected the computer to the server, it would get infected once again. The server was essentially a danger zone that would affect any computer again and again, so this became a nightmare as many computer experts would have to shut down the whole server by removing all computers from the server. Each computer had to reinstall the software as well as removing the worm. This had to be done one by one. Each computer had to have the worm manually removed. Various computer experts worked tirelessly to not only clean the computers, but to figure out a way to make sure the program would not start up again. Soon, the first patch would be made to fix the finger and send mail, and the patch was made so the virus could not target the whole system. They also informed people about the danger of weak passwords, as that was the reason as to why the virus was so successful. That this was all done by tireless students and experts who had to eliminate the worm. One of the biggest concerns was the possibility of corrupting or outright deleting files that were important. So, how big was this attack? Which was responsible for shutting down 6,000 computers, which was 10% of the existing computers on the internet. No one was safe. Businesses, schools, and even government computers were affected. As soon as the problem was solved, there was a question: who was responsible for this attack? And what was the reason for this attack? People initially thought that the attack could have come from Russia or a rogue hacker. People were scared of a potential second attack. The damages from this attack are hard to calculate, but estimates range in between hundreds of thousands of dollars to even millions of dollars in damages, so this was a pretty big event that even the government was set on finding out who was responsible. The reason as to why it was hard to find the originator of this code was because the worm was self-replicating. So in order to find out who was the person who sent the attack, they would need to check all the logs and find the first incident. Essentially, they have to find who was patient 0, the originator of this code, or at the very least find out where the first computer that was infected with the worm was. During this time, the story was everywhere, and people tried to find any leads, until someone made a call to the New York Times. The caller was unknown, but he claimed that he knew who was responsible for a person with the initials RTM. This was a big lead. The person who told the reporter accidentally leaked the person responsible for the attack. This RTM person was eventually found, and the person was Robert Tappan Morris. Robert was a 23-year-old student who went to Cornell University. The authorities were swift to arrest him and question him. The reason for the attack was simple. What Robert wanted to do is get a record of each computer and tried to make a record of all the computers. The reason why the problem spiraled out of control was because he would add a line of code in which probability of computers getting reinfected was higher than 10%. This was an unintentional accident that DDoSed the internet at large and exploited a problem in the system. If the probability was lowered to 1 in a million, then the chances of DDoSing the internet wouldn't have happened. What made this much more scary was the fact that the virus exploited the Unix sendmail and finger. So after finding out who was responsible for this attack, he would be taken to trial in the United States versus Morris, which took place in 1991, and he wasn't really convicted of much, since there wasn't as many rules, but he did face punishment. He was convicted of violating the 1986 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which prohibits anyone from accessing a computer or computer system without authorization. Morris was sentenced to 3 years in prison, 400 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. He was also a convicted felon, but got off relatively easy, considering he caused thousands, if not millions of dollars in damages, which was rather crazy to think about, since this was an accident. Meanwhile, losers in my fucking games DDoS for ranked points. This was a stupid but understandable mistake that was caused by an unknown person. Robert was responsible for indirectly scaring the whole world with his attack. His attack would be important for the future of computer science, as people found out another type of virus that was called the worm. I hope you liked the video, and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel.